Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the March 6th meeting of the Burke County Board of Commissioners, pre-agenda meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. All commissioners are present, county manager, clerk, and attorney. Gentlemen, I'll remind everybody, if you've got mobile devices, to please silence your mobile devices at this time. And I think we're ready to go. Just before we call the meeting and begin our meeting, I'm going to ask Brian to introduce a new employee.
My pleasure. It's actually Paul Imes is Deputy Finance Officer. I'm going to be calling him by the name of Thadomite. That's like thermonuclear dynamite. We expect him to do explosive things in our finance department, but his name is actually Thad Hodge. He's currently living in Rutherford County, and we're excited about him becoming part of the team. And I was telling him a little while ago about we'd sent out some information on Constant Contact, and I hope he gets a chance to look at it because we enjoy getting things done here. So, Thad, got a minute, or
yes,
say hi or whatever?
I'm Thad Hodge.
Come on up here, Thad,
Okay.
to this microphone if you would.
Okay. I'm Thad Hodge. I'm 28. I went to Appalachian State University and graduated in 2012. And then I began working right after school with the town of Lake Lure as an accountant. Went from there to be finance director for the town of Rutherford, and then went for a short stint in the private sector and realized that that was not for me. The public's where I wanted to be. I love helping others and love being a service to communities. I'm very excited about relocating to Burke County. As he said, we currently live in Rutherford County, but we've put our house on the market and are actively looking for a place to live up here. So if anyone... Oh yes, I do have my wife and 2 kids with me. My wife is Morgan, and then the little girl's Bonnie, and the little boy that's been running wild in here is Boone. He's 2 and lives to terrorize us, I think, but it's fun. And I love them all to death. So I'm very excited though, and I'll be starting Thursday. Anybody have any questions?
All right, well, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
All right, thank you, Stan.
I'm going to slip out if you don't mind so you guys can meet in peace.
Yes, sir. Is that a promise? All right, gentlemen, you have had the agenda for today's meeting. The sheriff has some other matters he needs to attend to, so I'm going to ask that we move. I think he has 2 items on the agenda, if my memory's correct. We'll move those forward if that's okay. Item 14 on the consent agenda will be removed. It is not quite ready for publication. With those changes, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. All right, thank you, Wayne. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. I believe that's all of us, Madam Clerk. All right, Sheriff, we will hear from you as item number 3 of Section 4, scheduled public hearing. This is an ordinance amending the code relating to recommendations for ABC permits and public hearing. Steve?
Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to go first. We had our, all right, thank you so much for this opportunity to go first. We had our annual Sheriff's Office, full Sheriff's Office meeting scheduled earlier when my father died, so we changed that, and that conflicted with today, so I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. I do want to say one thing about Maynard Taylor, though. I was at the George Hildebrand School Parade Friday, and I ran into his brother, who was part of the parade, pulling a tractor. And I was admiring his tractor, and he did tell me to say, when I saw Maynard, that Maynard's brother was the best-looking group, best one of that group out there, Maynard, so he wanted me to share that with you. The ABC ordinance is new, obviously, and I'm the one that approves the ABC permits, and the Sheriff's Office is desiring the state to allow us access to the State Bureau of Investigation's Division of Criminal Investigation, Criminal History Records, so we can do a criminal background in these cases. And one of the things we found out was that the county had to have an ordinance, so I appreciate the county drafting the ordinance that is before you, and we're just asking that you adopt that so I can do full criminal background checks on these applicants.
Okay, gentlemen, you've had an opportunity to look at this ordinance. Any questions for Steve on this matter?
Mr. Chairman, I have one question, not necessarily for Steve, but probably Scott as well, that from a previous discussion, and I thought to get a permit, they had to go through this process and had to clear that they were capable, able, and had the right to have an ABC permit. And this looks like we're double doing that duty. And Steve, do you come behind after they've done their job and double?
It appears that I do. When I get the information, it appears that they've went through the county process. And although it's really a recommendation, is not final. The ABC board has the final approval. They're just asking me to make a recommendation based on two things: the person background themselves and the location. What I learned when we do a limited records check, I have no idea what they may have outside of Burke County. And in fact, I've known a few of these people personally. And so the background check that we were allowed to do did not bring up charges that I was aware of. So that's the reason I asked that we be able to do a full background check so I can make a more informed recommendation to the ABC board.
Well, I see the process, and I see where you would have access to information that the planning board probably would not have
Right.
through the criminal reports. And
Right.
just wanted to clear that up. Seemed like we were double working both our employees, and if we didn't have to do it, didn't want to do it, so.
Gentlemen, if I could draw your attention, you have a revised ordinance at your seat that contains minor tweaks from the sheriff and the county attorney. So we're good to go.
Any other questions on this matter, gentlemen? Okay, hearing none, this item will remain on the agenda as presented. And that will bring us down to a decision item for the sheriff. Item number 1, this is a request for additional funds for inmate medical expenses. Yes, Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The sheriff's office has continued to see an increase in the numbers of inmates that we've been keeping. The difference that we're seeing, in addition to the increase of the numbers, is the health of some of these inmates are very poor. And it's costing extra money to get the treatment that North Carolina general statute requires jails to provide as far as medical costs. So we're soon going to have exhausted all the funds that we had budgeted for this fiscal year. So we're asking that we're hoping to get by the rest of the fiscal year with $50,000 increase for medical expenses for the downtown jail inmates and an additional $150,000 increase for medical expenses at the Burke-Catawba District Confinement Facility for a total of $200,000.
Okay, gentlemen, you've heard this information. Any questions for Steve on this matter?
Mr. Chairman, I did have a comment, and it's kind of a question too. Sheriff, who is reviewing and checking? I think the question is, are we being abused by the medical side of the field? And who's checking to make sure, that if I spend an hour in the doctor's office, is this much, 2 hours is this much? So who's checking against that to make sure that these charges are at least legitimate and reasonable?
Well, a couple different people. Of course, that's two different facilities. Our downtown jail, the lieutenant will review those to make sure that all the services that they have billed us for were actually services provided. And I can say that he has found services that were billed that were not provided. So we have caught some of those things. Same thing with the situation with Burke-Catawba. You got the director there as well as the administrative assistant that looks at those. When I came back to Burke County and started working at Burke-Catawba as a jail administrator, I was able to negotiate a significant savings from the local hospital to where we're only having to pay the cost that Medicaid has to pay rather than the full cost. In fact, we're actually saving more money through that process than we are with a program the North Carolina Sheriff's Association has where we can hire a company to scrub the bill. And when they scrub the bill, they are paid by how much they save the county. There's no cost to the county because they take a percentage of what they save the county. But some comparisons that we did at Burke Catawba was we were actually saving more by the negotiated rate that we have with the local hospital and doing our own scrubbing from a jail lieutenant and the Burke Catawba staff.
Well, that's excellent. The other question I would have, we're not being portrayed by the prisoner either. I've got a headache and all I really want is a change of scenery for a while.
Well, you have to be careful of that, and one of the things, again, when I was the administrator at Burke Catawba, we had an issue, and we actually changed the medical contractor. We hired the contractor now that had worked inside a prison. He had dealt with inmates before, so he was a little more educated to what inmates will do, and some of them obviously have been in the system a long time. They understand the system. And they will play games, so you have to be careful. So we rely upon our contracted physician, or in this case, physician's assistant, to do a good job in making sure that they do need services. Now, obviously, when you take them to the hospital, and what happens, and this happens quite often, is that they may find some additional problems that they come to the emergency department with that they really weren't complaining about, and then that costs money. Another thing that I unfortunately am seeing on the street is when we're arresting people, they're fine. You may have to go hands-on, you may have to fight them, you have to put them in a patrol car, and then all of a sudden they find an illness that they're suffering from, or their chest starts hurting, and we're required to take them by EMS, and so there's many times. We did it just the other day. When we arrest the guy, we get about a mile from the scene, and he says his chest starts hurting, and the deputy pulls over, calls EMS, and so those are costly, that we really have very little choice. A deputy can't make a medical decision on the side of the road, so we do have to rely upon our EMS officials to do that.
It looks like we have a safety net in place, Mr. Chairman. That's all the questions I had.
Any other questions on this matter? Do we have any other options, Mr. Sheriff?
I don't know of anything. If we had not compared the scrubbing that the Sheriff's Association company uses against ours, we could have used that. But I talked to the jail administrator, and the few times that he's compared the two, we're actually doing better. So I don't know of any other options. And I think our contracted medical provider is doing a good job in our jails. We have a different one for downtown jail than we do at Burke Catawba. I think it's going to be nice, though, when we do have our own jail, that we will have one contractor, because those inmates go back and forth from one facility to the other. And especially now when we're transporting them to facilities outside the county, now they've got maybe a third medical person that's seeing them. So I think it's going to be better when we have one medical person that's constantly seeing them. So it doesn't matter the location they're at. That same medical provider is aware of them, has the information, and can make more informed decisions on what kind of medical care they need.
Do they have health insurance to take care of it?
If they do have health insurance, we do submit that. Medicaid, Medicare, those things, we do submit those if they have them. But obviously, most of the people, well, a lot of the people we arrest don't have insurance and don't have any kind of coverage.
Any other questions? Well, I guess the next thing, you'll have to sign them up for all the benefits when they arrive.
It's very costly, and I really don't know what else to do, but we're doing our best, and hopefully we can reduce the jail population if we can, through the opioid abuse work that everybody's doing, including the sheriff's office and law enforcement and the county commissioners. Maybe we can reduce the opioid and other substance abuse, and that will have a dramatic impact. I've told people that if we can reduce the substance abuse problem. Here in Burke County, the crime rate's low. We have a very low crime rate. If we can do some work on substance abuse, we'll all live in Mayberry here.
All right, thank you, Steve. Any other questions? All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, this will bring us back up to the presentations item. We have one presentation to review, and that's coming from Community Development, Monteflora State Trail, and that'll be discussed by Scott Carpenter.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Madam Clerk. I'm just going to hit on a few things with this right now. My presentation at the regular meeting, I'll get more in depth, but a couple of things I'd like to share with you is, remember we started talking about this trail 5.5 years ago. It's unbelievable, it's been 5.5 years. And the construction of the trail started in 3 months. It'll have been 2 years. And we have been making good headway as we've made our way around the lake. One number I want to throw out at you is, it's hard to believe, but with the donations of land and grants and money and things like that, we're approaching $7 million already that have been invested in the Lake James Loop Trail. Another number that I've looked at means that at completion we'll be at about $14 million, and that's how much Duke Energy will be $5 million of that, and those include trail facilities and other things. So we currently have a lot of trail under contract too. The weather's holding us up. It's bogging down the contractors. We have bridges that are going in, filling in the gaps right now. We have about 8 miles of trail under contract that's waiting to be built, and that'll take us all the way across the state park to the bridge, the Cove Bridge that's going to be put in. The director of state parks, Carol Tingley, is trying to move that up for me. The construction of that bridge, as well as the visitor center to accommodate, so we'll have a trail to nowhere. And when we finish that, we'll be from Canal Bridge to Harris Wisnet Road solid. And we'll have also tied in the new Final Flora Brewery to that. So that's going well. And one last thing is, we've bounced back and forth with Duke Energy on the dam. And I was informed a couple of weeks ago that Duke Energy did not want to allow us to go across the top of the dam to where we'd have views of the surrounding Black Mountains and the South Mountains and that kind of thing, that they'd allow us to put a trail lower down and cross it. But the chief engineer called me yesterday, that's in charge of all of Duke's dams, and he assured me that he will help me to cross the dam on the lake side with full views of everything. So that'll be a major project, but we're going to get there. And so that's all I'll have right now.
Yes.
Scott, the Sunday, we already got a parking problem out there at the site. Boy, I tell you, there was a lot of people out there Sunday. I don't know what they're going to do for parking, but there was also a lot of bicyclists out there that rode in the road, down the road. But
That's the kind of problems I want.
I'm sure, but there was, I don't know what you're going to do with parking. Some of them parked across the street.
I'll present to you the parking options. We're looking at 14 trailheads, but they're small. They tend to be 8 cars, some of them 10. Final Four Brewery will be a trailhead, and some other places we're going to be retrofitting in. So it'll be dispersed. We're going to probably double the size of our trailhead that's at Fish Hatchery Road. So
people are using it. They really are using it.
So we're getting a lot of good feedback about the trail, and we're actually getting Buncombe County and Henderson County. I have meetings with them on how to run trail. So that's good. People are looking to us now to say, you all are doing pretty good there in Burke County on the trail stuff. So.
All right, thank you, Scott. Any other question on this matter? Okay, hearing none, this item will remain on the agenda without objection. This will take us on into scheduled public hearings. Community Development Zoning Map Amendment ZMA 2018-01. That'll be a public hearing along with this. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was a rezoning request from Mr. and Mrs. Mike Williams, and essentially they're asking to rezone a property that's about 2 acres in size from R2 residential to general business. They intend on putting 3 storage buildings on there for mini warehouse, and they would be putting 3,000 square foot storage buildings on this parcel. They'll also be leaving the back half of the parcel R2 residential to serve as a buffer to other surrounding uses, as well as they intend to build a house there in the future. So this parcel of land used to have a house on it. It was dilapidated, it was torn down and cleared. So this parcel is already ready to build. It'll require very little grading or anything. There's already water, public water to the site. It will rely on a septic system for that. As you can see on the existing land use map that's there's a whole variety of uses, including agriculture across the street from it, commercial directly to the south, and some industrial, which is probably some warehousing, office institutional, which generally in this area means it's a church or a school. And so there's a whole variety of things. This particular land use is in compliance with our strategic land use plan, which actually looked at this area as one of their economic development nodes, which is generally an area out in the rural county that you offer services that can supply neighborhood business type of things for a short stint to the Dollar General, churches, things like that. So it's in compliance with that. There was only one person that spoke at the meeting. It was actually a neighbor, and the neighbor supported this and said that this seemed fine to him, that he didn't see that this would negatively affect him. There are some pictures in your packet that show the site itself. And so the staff, of course, recommended approval of this, and the planning board met on January 25th, 2018, and they voted unanimously to approve this, or to recommend approval to the board. And that's all I have on this. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I have 3. Scott, I believe, if I recall correctly, our zoning ordinance, if you don't have public water or sewer, you cannot build a house on less than an acre lot.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So this would be less than an acre lot, and he's planning to build a house behind his place, and that's, I think you said about 2/3 of an acre would be left. So my question would be that, plus the fact, if he wants it rezoned, why doesn't he rezone the entire acreage? And can he really come back and say, we don't have public water, but I want to build a house, and
But
we're going to give him a house?
So it does have public water?
Does it have sewer?
No, sir. And so it reduces the size a certain amount. And the reason that he wanted to leave that other part was for a buffer as well.
Who's the water through out there? Chesterfield?
Do you know, Pete, who that's from? I'm not sure who is providing the water.
Didn't they sell to the city of Morganton, maybe? That used to be
It
water.
could be. I'll find out. And
I believe it's Morganton.
Well, as long as they got it, it's not pertinent information to know who it was. I was just wondering if Chesterfield came up that far.
it
Back this
could.
way.
I'm just sorry, but I don't know.
Okay. So this does not break into our ordinance?
No,
if
sir.
He wants to build a house on it.
That's right.
No other question?
Okay, other questions? Scott, the parcel next door looks like it also has mini storage. Is this owned by the same folks, do you know, or is it somebody else?
I do not know. Pete, do you know? It's a different ownership.
Any other questions? All right, hearing none, this matter will remain on the agenda without objection. Item number 2, zoning text amendment, CTA 2018-01.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just a second, does that need to have another number? I just noticed that's the same number as the one above.
One is ZMA and one is ZTA.
I see that, okay, thank you. All right, carry on.
So this discussion started, I can't remember, it could have been as long as 3 years ago, and McDowell County was talking about putting an intake in Lake James. And we came to the board at the time, and we had discussions. And the discussion was that we would not support any classification of the water supply watershed at Lake James that was not a WS4, which is the least restrictive of the water supply watershed classifications. We weren't sure at the time if McDowell County was or was not going to put an intake in Lake James, and we're still not really sure of that fact, but they did petition to the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission for a change to the watershed classification. So there was no classification, and the way water supply watershed protection works is the classifications are based on an intake and where that is. So if it's in a river, then it's a critical area established around that intake in the river, and then it runs 10 miles upstream of the river and everything draining to it within 5 miles of that. The other one is if it's in a lake, then it establishes a critical area a half a mile around the lake and draining into the lake, plus 5 miles upstream and draining to the lake. So they applied for this, and the Environmental Management Commission approved it. So for us, there's really just a formality process, because once the Environmental Management Commission approves it, it essentially becomes a state law, a state overlay zoning district on us that we have to comply with. Years ago, before the counties had zoning, they adopted water supply watershed protection ordinances. Those ordinances were the base for about 50% of zoning in the state of North Carolina, because for the first time it established rules on how people could build, densities, and other things. And my guess is it may have superseded here in Burke as well. So the WS4 that's in place essentially allows a 24% impervious built-upon area within the critical area. It allows 24 to 36% in the protected area. That's the area outside of the half a mile. And we also allow 10% of that protected area to build at 70% impervious surface. And so they would come to us and say, we need to build more than 24%, and we're allowed to do that for up to 10% of that watershed. We have to track it on a spreadsheet, and so we do that for any place that allows the 1070 provision that's in water supply watershed. So this one is in place, and this is just us coming into compliance with that, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have on what water supply watershed does or doesn't do.
Questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have several. First one I'm going to ask you, Scott, how many of the property owners, and that's a huge tract of land together to a little over 2,500 acres. So how many property owners are aware that this is a possibility, is about to happen to their property?
I'm not sure. Now, keep in mind that almost all of that land that's protected area is in national forest or state forest, so it's not.
Most of it?
Most all of it is. The protected area
Excuse me, go ahead.
is the areas that are around Lake James, the housing and those things. We already have rules that are so strict around the lake that I see very little impact here. It's hard to come up with a scenario here that would that this would be more restrictive than what our existing rules are at Lake James. We're very
Okay,
strict
you
out there.
said didn't have very little impact. I'm a property owner. I own 60 acres. I got 20 acres in pasture. I got 20 cows.
Mhm.
I make hay on the rest of it. I put chicken litter on my pasture. How does that impact me?
It doesn't impact you on water supply watershed protection. It would impact you if we had rules on nitrogen and things like that, like we have in some of the other watershed districts in the state. Those are special environmental rules. I don't think you'll see many of those put into place with a Republican legislature, though. They're very restrictive.
And then
We're talking 8% impervious surface on some of those.
in item number 5, it says, will establish certain development standards. I thought they were established, we were just bringing them up to the already established rules.
What are we looking at, Mr. Maynard?
I'm on page, I just did it. I'm at your, yeah,
It's under the suggested motions, part 5 of the suggested motion.
21 is the page, number 5.
So these standards are already in existence. They're already in our ordinance, they're already in our zoning ordinance in the water supply watershed protection. What this does is it creates a map that you can see there, and then it applies as an overlay to that area. So we're not creating anything new as far as land uses. So water supply watershed doesn't tend to regulate the types of land uses. It basically goes with impervious amounts, and then it wants you to stay off of streams. And if you're high density type of development, you have to stay 100 feet off the stream. If you're low density, it's like 30 feet off the streams.
But, and again, my question, the text amendment is not changing for anybody, or it's not new, it's just placing those ordinance on this acreage of land that's already around the Lake James.
Well, that's right. The state put it in place.
That word had,
The biggest difference that people would see is they'd have to stay 30 feet off of the perennial streams.
are there any rules, I didn't have this question, but I want to ask it. Are there any rules that says when we do this, that each property owner out there must be notified?
No, sir, not on this type of action, because this is a state action.
Should we notify each property?
I don't think so, because it won't have any real impact on them. I think more than anything, it might stoke up some fears that there's impact, but we looked at this in depth, and we think that these rules are less than what the existing rules are.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Other questions for Scott? All right, thanks, Scott.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, this will bring us now on down to consent agenda. First item on the consent agenda is proclamation declaring Youth in Government Day. This is an event that we have participated in for many years, and this spring here, or no, it looks like I'm going to talk about that, so I'm talking about it right now. Any question about Youth in Government Day? And I think we need to settle on a date. Is that right, Madam Clerk? Preferred dates, gentlemen, as you can see, are April 27th, 19th, or 26th, or any day of the week, April 23 through 27. So please take a look at your calendars, and perhaps we can arrive at a date. Is the 27th the preferred date, Madam Clerk? Do you know that? Or
That is Spring William Bird's preferred date, and she kind of facilitates this event for us. But we'll be happy to do it whatever day is convenient for the board. We did think that doing it on a Friday might appeal to the students. We've, I think, usually done it on a Thursday, but it just kind of seemed more like a fun Friday event.
April 27th, does that work for everybody, or is it a problem for anybody? April 27th, it is, Madam Clerk. this brings us to item number 2, resolution supporting Marshall's Law, and I'll make some comments here. This is our state legislature has been looking at strengthening victims' rights as they relate to follow-up after whether it be incarceration or any of those kinds of things. I suspect that all of you have received an email relating to this. I asked our attorney to look at the resolution or the item. JR did not seem to have any concerns about it. Any question about this item?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of comments and probably a couple of questions. Certainly needed, but I don't want to end up the same way and be blamed for how we blame our federal government and state government to pass something that doesn't give the money, as it's an unfunded mandate. And my questions are two. What is the full cost to implement that? And the second one, who pays it? If we don't know those two questions, we don't have much use of passing that ordinance.
Of course, this is a resolution just simply supporting the legislature's action. It'll be a state law if it is approved. It'd be nothing as far as the county's concerned. It's just the resolution supporting HB 551 and SB 595.
I understand. I read it several times. It's a lot of money. Whole bunch of money. I attempted to get a hold of Warren Daniel this morning and did not make it to ask that question.
Well, I should hope that they are looking into that end of it. JR, any comments on your end of this matter?
Well, I think the expense would be to the prison system, because they would be charged with notifying victims of the release or parole of violent criminals, and they would be charged with following up with victims and giving them their opportunity to be heard. I don't see that as a county expense.
Other questions, concerns?
Yeah. It's the same, and it should be. Like I said, I agree with it. So understand, they get the same right as anybody else in the court system. A couple months back, I think y'all recall that I asked for the numbers of how many people who went through the court system that tax dollars paid their charges. I thought it was 60-some%. It came back 81%. So we're passing something here that if 81% of the dollars are going to be funded by tax dollars, I think we as a county board, and I think the public as a whole, needs to know where that cost and who's going to pay for it. What is the cost and who's going to pay for it? Hopefully we can find out by the time we have our meeting in 2 weeks.
All right. Any other comments, questions? Hearing none, this item will remain on consent agenda. This moves us to item number 3, appointments to the Burke County Planning Board. This will be by Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is a request to appoint Mr. Gary Clean to the Burke County Planning Board to seat number 3. Currently, seat number 3 is vacant, and the term would end September 30th, 2020.
All right. Any questions on this matter? All right. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda without objection. Item number 4, Council on Aging, reappointments and removals. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The terms of appointment for Amy Elliott, Larry Berryhill, Kathy Pritchard, Jean Cosgrove, and Maxine Childress ended November 30th. Mr. Berryhill and Ms. Childress are seeking reappointment for a 3-year term. Ms. Pritchard has served the maximum number of terms allowed, therefore, we're requesting her removal. And Ms. Elliott and Ms. Cosgrove are not seeking reappointment at this time, so we are also requesting that their names be removed as well.
Any questions on this matter? Hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda. Item number 5, Recreation Commission appointments and removals. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The terms for Parks and Recreation Commission members end in March. Stephen Hines representing Forest Hills, John Pollard representing W.A. Young, and Tamara Agner representing Mull. Mr. Perry, who represented the Oak Hill community, resigned because he has removed out of the district, and Mr. Pollard is not interested in serving another term. Mr. Hines and Ms. Agner are seeking reappointment. The term is for 3 years.
Questions on this matter? Hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda. Item number 6, Community Development, accepting the STBGDA grant agreement. That'll be presented by Shane Frisbee. Afternoon, Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The Community Development Department had applied for and received an STBGDA grant through the state of North Carolina Department of Transportation. This is a request to authorize the grant agreement so that we can begin the project for continuing the Fauna Flora State Trail down Cobb Road and North Powerhouse Road to Laurel Court Ridge. And this grant is being matched by the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund grant, which you have already approved and has been authorized.
Questions on this matter?
Mr. Chairman, I thought it kind of amusing that we're asked to approve $870 grant, $570 from Burke County Development Department and $300 PARTF, and we don't have the agreement. So we're approving 800. However, with that being said, the 41-page contract and agreement is on page 41 of the next item.
Other questions, comments? All right. Hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda. This brings us into item number 7, Community Development, accept the Recreational Trails Program 2018 grant contract. Again, be presented by Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is accepting the Recreational Trails Program 2018 grant. This is for the boardwalk section of trail for the Fauna Flora State Trail that will connect west from Linville access. And it will be built as a combination of trail, and then it will switch to boardwalk where the embankment gets quite steep, and we'll fit it in between NC 126, the end of the embankment, and Lake James. This is accepting the $100,000 grant and allowing us to begin the project.
All right, gentlemen, any question on this matter? Hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda. Moving on to item number 8, Community Development, resolution in support of application for the 2018 STBGDA call for projects. Again, Shane.
Thank you again. This is a resolution for our application for the next cycle of funding for the STBGDA grant. This project is a continuation of where the other one leaves off at Laurel Court Ridge. It would be a side path on North Powerhouse Road and then a combination of boardwalk going across the Linville Dam and then portions of trail as well that would connect into the existing Portage Trail on the other side of the dam. So this project that we're asking for would encompass the planning, design, engineering, permitting, and the right-of-way phase of the grant that includes any utility relocations.
All right, thanks, Shane. Any questions on this matter? All right, here none. Item 8 will remain on the consent agenda without objection. Item number 9, resolution in support of application to the 2019 Recreational Trails Program Trailheads. Again, Shane.
Thank you very much. This is a resolution of support from the county for application for a Recreation Trails Program grant for $100,000 to clear, build, and add amenities for 2 trailheads on the Fauna Flora State Trail. One being at Harris Wisnett Road, which at this point would be is the terminus of the trail on the southern and eastern end of the lake, as well as a trailhead on land granted to us through easement at Linville River, and that would be the trailhead section for the 2017 RTP project that we have just authorized a contract for the Long Arm State Park section of 6.5 miles of the Fauna Flora State Trail.
All right, thanks, Shane. Any question on this matter?
Mr. Chairman, did I hear you say the cost would be $10,000 per parking lot?
We're estimating 100,000, or we're asking for $100,000 for the entire 2 parking areas, and that includes clearing, grading, shaping, fixing the trail in the sections, as well as kiosks, sign printing, trailhead signs, and gravel materials, contractor time. It's everything from start to finish to have a complete.
How many cars will it accommodate?
For the first section, we have about 100 by 87.5 feet as a total, so we're hoping to get at least 8 in there. That would be ideal, but we need to make sure that we have enough space for people to park vehicles comfortably and get them in and out without any issue. The second one would be about the same. It's a 60-foot wide parcel, and we're estimating about 100 feet or so down and in, and that, again, we'll try to put them in and allow for access in and out. So some of them are site restriction before our easement takes a turn. So it won't, they won't be major parking facilities, but what our goal is to, with 13 different trailheads around the lake, is to help spread out use in different areas, have some larger parking areas to be the main points, but also provide overflow options or different experiences to get people using different portions of the trail to make sure that they have a place to go and they're putting wear on the trail evenly, which saves us maintenance effort in the long run.
May I paraphrase just to make sure I understood what you just said? Both parking spaces are going to cost about $100,000.
Combined, everything combined.
Both parking lots,
Correct.
$50,000 apiece. It's going to hold 60 to 80 cars.
16.
16. And the other thing is a councilor's question, Mr. Chairman, just on my thoughts as a salesperson. We have in here that we will match the funds either from Duke Power or from Burke County. Now, if I'm Duke Power and I see that and I've got 20 things I'm going to support, I'm quickly going to move this one off to the third tier of what I will support. My question is, wouldn't it be much smarter to drop Burke County, and if Duke doesn't do it, come back and okay the $25,000? That wordage on there is, I don't think that's using the best of our knowledge and wording that to where we have an either or that would make it easier for one of us to say no.
And just as the Duke CRA funding has already been appropriated to the county, and that's funds that are available. So it's not new request of funding from Duke Energy. It's funding that's already allocated to us.
Okay, so if it's already been funded, why are we saying our Burke County?
Right now, we're asking to transfer for some of the money from the Over Mountain Victory National Historic Trail Fund pot of money to the Loop Trail pot of money, which we are in process of asking right now. So for allowing us to apply for the grant and/or is a part of that to prove that we will fund it in a capacity to get the match money to put in these necessary trailhead facilities. We are also requesting it as a part of our annual budget as well.
So you're saying to comply with the application, that needs to be that way?
Understanding, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda as presented. Item number 10, resolution in support of application of the 2019 Recreational Trails Program. Shane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is another Recreational Trails Program grant, and this one covers the connection of the trail from where our 2018 RTP grant for the boardwalk leaves off. We have a gap section between our two RTP 2018 sections to connect the Linville River trail that we are under construction now and the section to Linville access that we'll be building. So this is a request for the funding for the trail portion to connect that in. It's through a section of County Park that has very little grade change, is very low, and at times very wet. So what we're going to end up having to do for a majority of the stretch is have an elevated walkway surface that will be pressure-treated lumber to get us up and elevated to make sure that we can actually put a trail through this section.
Questions on this matter? Hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda without objection. Item number 11, resolution in support of application to the 2019 RTP program, bridges.
Mr. Chairman, this grant is a sister grant to the Northwest Trail section. There are two bridges that are necessary to make that, finalize that connection of trail. One is 18 foot in length and the other will be 55 foot in length. So because of the grant limitation of asking for $100,000 plus the match, we felt that asking for a second grant for the bridges would be the best way to complete the trail and make sure that we have the best, most sustainable trail built that we need to complete this portion of the Fauna Flora State Trail.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Any question on this matter? Okay, hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda as presented. Item number 12, resolution in support of application to the 2019 Recreational Trails Program at Covered Bridge. Shane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This application is for the bridge over White Creek. It's on a section of the Fauna Flora State Trail that is already built. Currently, what we have is several stepping stones to help people ford White Creek. Two of them are already underwater because of scouring, and that portion of the creek does shift, and the material is fairly sandy. So this is a very popular section of trail. County Park is really our biggest section of trail that's complete and really the center for the Fauna Flora State Trail. This is very close to Linville access, which is a very popular recreation destination and starting point for trail users. It also serves as a really big barrier for our maintenance equipment because we cannot get across White Creek without a bridge. So it's we're asking for the funding to help us bridge that gap.
Okay, questions?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't have, but I did want to ask one. These trails, will they be open to sports utility vehicles, the motorized?
Outside of maintenance vehicles, they will not.
They will not.
That is correct.
I noticed that you were pretty clear with your explanation that you're going to have 6 foot clear from railing to railing.
That is
And I
correct.
thought maybe that was the reason that you had that 6 foot instead of 5 foot. But I didn't think they were supposed to be on there. Just double checking. Thank you.
Commission.
Other questions?
And I was gonna say, just because of the, Mr. Chairman, on the width, is because we bought that piece of equipment last year to access the trail, and so it has to be that wide, I suppose.
They'll need to be able to get emergency equipment there if they have to have a medical extraction, so that helps us do that.
Other questions, comments?
We built a couple of them, they were 5 feet. What we found was the big 18 ordinances used, they would work on the 5-foot bridge marker. They're right against them, so we had to go a foot wider.
All right, this brings us on to item 13, resolution of support of application to the 2019 RTP Over Mountain National Historic Trail Board Walk. Shane.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is our final request from the Recreation Trails Program. It is for a section of the Over Mountain Victory National Historic Trail and Fauna Flora State Trail. It's a section where the trails will share corridor. It is already in existence. It is on, it's right by Canal Bridge on state park land. Currently, there is what looks like a bridge to nowhere from a small pocket park. The bridge takes you across a drainage and leaves you at a hill that is covered in ivy, and there's no real clear trail to get you up to grade with the road to cross Canal Bridge. So what we're proposing is putting in a boardwalk to help elevate users and get around up to grade with the road so that they can continue across Canal Bridge. As right now, it's not obvious where there is a trail, and it certainly does not meet Fauna Flora State Trail grade guidelines. This will still have the same width that we have been using for boardwalk, and that is in part for bicyclists who won't be riding on the boardwalk, but they will want to be walking their bike. So we'll have to have wider landing platforms to make the turns to accommodate the grade and the elevation change. So it's not necessary for us in that stretch because there is a driveway that our maintenance vehicle could go around it, but it is also state park land, and the maintenance vehicle couldn't make it on the portions of the Overmount Victory National Historic Trail that are already there, as well as it being state park land, and it's up to their jurisdiction how they maintain the trails.
Okay, questions for Shane on this subject? Okay, hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda. Brings us to item 14. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you very much.
Item 14 is removed, and so we'll move on to item 15, Tax Department, and that'll be presented by Danny, Tax Collection Report. And gentlemen, you should have some of that information, I believe, attached to your agenda as well.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Collection summary, just I'll hit the highlights. Property tax collection, we are at 97.97% collected. Motor vehicle, we're at 56.6%, which gives us an overall of 93.84% collected. The delinquent taxes, we're at 64.23%, and late list penalty category, we're at 69.92% collected.
Okay, gentlemen, you've heard this information. Any questions for Danny? Hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda without objection. Item 16, release refund report for February 2018.
For the release refund report, it shows $5,427.35. We had $72.97 that were rebilled, which give us a net release amount of $5,354.38. And we had refunds in the amount of $2,885.64. That's all on our property tax system. On the vehicle tax system, we had adjustments that require or release refunds that require board approval of 0.
Questions for Danny on this item?
This is just a couple analogies here. On release funds, LPUF, you had one person at 14, and then we had on a value change, you had one entity with 30 on it, and then under the refund, you had to put those 30 back on to correct that. And that just seemed like an awful lot for one entity, and I just wondered what created that. Is there a scenario that would explain that a little bit?
Well, we had the one gentleman that, we had him listed with 6 different lots. Okay? He had recorded a plat that combined those into 3 different lots. So what we had to do is go back and release prior year's bills on those where it's combined, and then discover the value on the 3 lots. So whenever you do that, going back to 2014, I believe it was, it
Yes.
created a lot of transactions. But, you know, in your accounting, you have to do each one individual, you can't combine them. Now, I will assume that's one that you are referring to. I will assume that's one that you're referring to. The other one, on the back with, Carolina Centers was where we had a tax appeal that went over several different years. That was also a discovery, where the property was not listed in the proper ownership. We discovered it into the proper ownership. Then that gave him the ability to appeal that value. They appealed the value, and so that's where we come out with all those changes under Carolina Centers.
Other questions?
That did not, I didn't add up all the expenses, but that was a big, huge, just one section of it was over $5,000.
Yep.
That kind of
Every,
raised
every once in a while, there are some transactions when you have to do a correction that just snowballs into a lot more than you even want to think about.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you, Danny.
Thank you, gentlemen.
This brings us to item 17, Western Piedmont Council of Governments Fair Housing Assessment and Complaint Procedure. That's going to be presented by Aaron Schott, is that correct?
Shoddy.
Schotty, okay.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm Erin Shoddy. I work at the Western Piedmont Council of Governments, and for those of you who don't know me, I work in the Community Development Department with Leah Martin, Sherry Long, and I'm working right now with Leah Martin on the Roney Road Highway 18 South Waterline project. And for that project, there was CDBG funding acquired. The CDBG program has certain requirements for administrative procedures that the county or the applicant would need to adhere to. I'm sure you've probably seen some of these already, the procurement plans and things like that coming before the board. This should be the last piece of that. So what you have before you today is the assessment of fair housing. It analyzes all of the different impediments, potential impediments to fair housing, and also the complaint procedure, which is a pretty formed document, I guess, and it just indicates that in the event there is a housing complaint, discrimination complaint, they would bring that to the county manager. If it can't be resolved at a local level, he would then take it to, or send it on to the NC Human Relations Commission. So that's the complaint procedure. That's one thing that would need to be adopted by the county in order to fulfill CDBG requirements. The other piece, the much bigger piece, is the assessment that I've been working on for the last several months. Met with Kay, and she was able to kind of connect me with some different people throughout the community. I would note that I had initially included a bank list of the lending institutions that we sent surveys out to, and that has since been revised, and you should have it in front of you, just to include a few more banks that I had missed on the first go-around. So the major issues that were identified were a lack of fair housing knowledge, which is pretty consistent with past assessments for the county. Concentrations of substandard housing, we have those all throughout the region, but we do have some specific areas that we would maybe want to target. And then disparities in access to opportunities for certain areas. And in the report, I really focus on Northern Morganton. There are a couple of other areas around Hildebrand and such that have some of these same issues. So the goals for addressing those, and these are, it may be confusing because there's a couple different kinds of goals, but the two main ones that the county would be required to adhere to, or CDBG would want reporting on, would be the lack of fair housing knowledge. So the goal would be to conduct fair housing outreach activities quarterly for the life of the grant, which I think is 3 years. That's something that the COG will handle, and that's things like sending out mailings and doing surveys, workshops, things like that. We'll have a booth at the Morganton Festival to do some outreach. The other part is a little bit vague because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Is to support funding efforts for expanded bus routes in Burke County. And that came from the disparities in access to opportunity. Specifically, I was looking at, northern Morganton, we have concentrations of LEP, limited English proficiency populations, minority populations, and low-income populations. But there are not a whole lot of job centers in that area. There are, however, a lot of job centers just south of there. So for issues like that, more reliable public transportation could help to bridge some of those gaps. That's an ongoing project that the COG, I know, is working on trying to fund those routes. Right now, we only have call and response in Burke County, so they're wanting to fund a fixed route. But we don't have a clear picture of what that's going to look like. So if you'll just continue to support those projects and those grants or loans or however it gets done as we move forward. The other goals were to continue participating in the COG's Vacant Substandard Housing Task Force, continue participating in the Unifor Consortium. There was one more, and I didn't write it down. Advocate the construction of additional rental and home ownership units for all, especially LMI persons in Burke County. And that's something that will be ongoing forever. So if y'all have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them.
All right. Under your banks there, the first one, Bank of Granite, they're no longer in business. It's Capital Bank now.
Is that the one on Carbon City Road?
The very first one under your sheet here.
Oh, okay.
It's Capital Bank.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, if I send you a revision. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Other questions for Aaron or comments?
Mr. Chairman, just one. Counties our size, same situation, kind of.
Yeah.
How do we rate with them? Are we about even? Is everybody in about that same category?
Yeah, relatively even, especially in this area. We all have a lot of the same issues with fair housing knowledge. Substandard housing, I don't know if you've been privy to any of the COG's presentations recently, but they've noted that we have very old housing in this region. So some of those issues are just bound to be. It is notable, I think, that we didn't have any actual segregation. While there are concentrations of different minority and low-income populations, we did not see any segregation in the county. So that's great. That's good news. There were no what are called RCAPs, or can't remember exactly what it stands for, but that would be a concentration of minority or low-income populations, and we don't have those. So I think we're doing all right.
You gave us some ideas of things how we could improve. If you had to name the two highest priorities that you'd like to see Burke County attack, what would they be?
If I had named my favorite two, probably the transportation would be a big one. The other issues are just so complicated. Substandard housing is huge. There really is a need for newer and nicer, particularly low-income housing, but that's not just a quick fix. So I kind of would hesitate to put that at the top of the list.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Okay, hearing none, this item will remain on the consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item for decision, of course, the sheriff's already presented. I think we do have the option, if it is your desire, to move that item to consent What would be the pleasure of the board on this matter?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan.
That's the sheriff's item asking for more medical funds.
I personally don't see anything that deals with funds, just,
Decision item. Leave it as decision. Everybody okay with that? Okay, it'll stay as is. Of course, gentlemen, if you have reports that you would like to be included in the package, please get those to the clerk by Monday morning, March the 12th. Other items, remind you that our legislative breakfast with Western Piedmont Community College will be March the 23rd at 8 a.m. That's at Foothills, and I'm thinking the room number 211, that's upstairs, I think, there across from the elevator. And our April pre-agenda meeting will be held at South Mountain State Park Auditorium. So if you need help with that, Madam Clerk, I'm sure can assist, but it's just a little trek down there. Any question about that? All right, here none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no.